And now back to our main focus this evening. Now, as we look forward, the potential shifts in U.S. foreign policy, particularly in relation to Ukraine and NATO, there are key questions about how these changes are going to impact European security. And joining me now to discuss what Donald Trump's re-election could mean for Ukraine's stability, NATO's cohesion, and the broader geopolitical landscape and context, I'm pleased to welcome Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Mr. Brzezinski, thank you so much for being with us here on World News Tonight on TVP World. So, sir,
Thank you for having me on.
I'm going to go straight right in. What can you tell us so far about who will form Trump's new cabinet and particularly his Secretary of State?
Well, I was listening, Diana, to your previous interviews, and I largely agree with what was said. I'd add the following. You know, this is going to be a selection process that focuses on loyalty and confidence in execution of Trump's instincts and policies. Who you're not going to see are the likes of Jim Mattis, Mark Esper, Rex Tillerson, John Bolton, General McMaster, people who pushed against Trump's instincts and desires. This is going to be all about loyalty. So I don't really see much room for Senator Rubio, Mike Pompeo, or Senator Cotton, because they're independent-minded. They could bring their own agenda. And particularly when it comes to Department of Defense and Department of State, which the previous Trump administration had great frustration with. They felt that the deep state was embedded in these organizations. So they're going to be picking people more along the lines of Grinnell and Waltz and Miller and Haggerty than Rubio, Pompeo, or Cotton.
Now, let me ask you something that's really concerning, of course, in this region. How do you see Trump's approach to Ukraine potentially impacting the security landscape here in Europe? I mean, what scenarios could we be really looking at here? Like, could we see a reduction in military aid?
Well, I'll start this way. We know what Trump has said. He said he believes that Ukraine launched this war. Ukraine's ambitions to join NATO provoked Putin into attacking. We know that that Trump has complained frequently about the amount of assistance going to Ukraine. He held up assistance before. We know that he looks at Ukraine as largely Russia's invasion of Ukraine as largely a European vice a U.S. or transatlantic problem. He hasn't himself been much more specific than that. But when you listen to his Vice President-elect J.D. Vance and people around Trump, you can you can game out a scenario in which Trump, in his first 100 days, might go to President Putin and say, hey, cease and desist, accept a ceasefire, otherwise I'll arm the Ukrainians to the teeth. And then he would go to the Ukrainians, say, President Zelensky, cease and desist, accept a ceasefire, otherwise I'll stop assistance to you. Well, that would be a deal that I think Putin would grab quickly because it would buy him time, he would dig in, he would reconstitute, and he would position himself for a further attack against Ukraine, if not elsewhere in Europe. Another part of the deal that you hear from people around Trump is forcing Ukraine to accept permanent neutrality, which of course would be stripping Ukraine a bit of its sovereignty and leaving it vulnerable to future Russian aggression. That's what you hear. But you got to remember, you never know with Trump. He doesn't always do, he often doesn't do what he says he'll do.
Right, he's unpredictable.
So for my European friends, I said this is now a time to engage the Trump transition team to try and shape its perceptions.
In what ways could Trump's new administration here alter the current U.S. commitment to NATO?
Well, I don't believe that Trump is focusing, certainly in the early part of his administration, on stripping the United States out of NATO. I think he's got a broader agenda. And it'll be a disruptive agenda. It'll be tariffs right across the board for the EU. It'll be a shift in the Middle East of full support behind Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, in his battle against Hamas and Hezbollah. It'll be a reduced focus of attention on a two-state, maybe even an abandonment of a two-state solution. It'll be an effort to significantly increase pressure on Iran, sanctions, really heavy sanctions on Iran. That would be very disruptive to the context. Climate change, he'll pull us out of the climate change agreement, the Paris Accords, right away. That would be very disruptive. On NATO, What he'll come in early on is asking for another increase in defense spending, pushing national defense spending to an equivalent of 3.5, if not 4%. And where he'll do damage to NATO is by what he will probably do on Ukraine, trying to force perhaps an unfair solution to this brutal invasion. And I think that would do a lot of damage to the credibility of the United States and therefore the credibility of NATO and its security commitment.
Mr. Brzezinski, and just very briefly, what about how might Trump's presidency impact the global balance of power, especially with countries like China and Russia?
If the president brings an agenda that is disruptive to its most important security and economic relationships, he will weaken the balance of power between the United States and its key adversaries.
Thank you so much, Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for being with us here on World News Tonight on TVP World.
Thank you.
Pleasure speaking to you. And that's all for this edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.